Hello, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. And today is the last and final day of my 30-day IG Live challenge. And I just want to say thank you for staying with me so long. For those of you who have been tuning in and messaging me and giving me questions to speak on, thank you so much. So today I thought to wrap up this 30-day IG Live challenge. I was wondering what I should be speaking about to wrap it up. And then I decided, I know, because throughout these 30 days, some of you have been curious and asked me, you're not sure what is it that I am? What is it that I do? Someone has asked me, are you a counselor? Someone, asked me, I think one of the usual questions that I get asked, even outside of these 30 days is, are you a spiritual director? Or what is it that you're doing? Because what I do seem to be similar to, for example, maybe what a counselor might do or say, or what a spiritual director might do or say. So that is why if you look at what my profile is on Instagram or anywhere that where I put it out, the title I've given myself to describe what it is I do is interior integration coach. Okay, more specifically, I call myself an interior integration and clarity coach. So, what's an interior integration coach, and why am I one? What has been the point of the past 29 days of sharing on IG Live? Why is it that I've been talking about wholeness in Christ? And also, what's this unique perspective that I'm bringing that maybe you can't quite name or articulate? You find some aspects familiar, and yet I bet most of you feel like there's something a little different about the way Anne talks about these same things that we've heard before, right? And I always repeat when I answer questions that come in that I am answering from the perspective of interior integration. So let me start off by sharing what's the point of interior integration. I'll say, and I'm borrowing a phrase here, an inspired phrase that a dear friend just sent in recently as part of a wish to my husband. So this friend wished my husband depth of peace and radiance of authenticity. Depth of peace and radiance of authenticity. And I was just so struck by how beautiful this wish was. And then I realized, actually, that is exactly the point of our interior journey. It's not the only way to describe the point of our interior journey, but one way to describe in terms of how you experience, what your experience is, and how people will experience you when you go through interior integration is exactly, there will be a depth of peace that wasn't there before, and you will be radiant with authenticity. Okay, so that's kind of like the point. And when you imagine or you just think about how those words feel, depth of peace and radiance of authenticity, that is so lacking in the world, isn't it? I know my whole life that was lacking, not just in my own personal life, like in my person, but in the environments that I was in. And as a child, and as a youth, and as a young adult, guess what? I was so hungry for peace, for authenticity, for love, for witness, for witness to what it means to be true, to be authentic, to have integrity. But more often than not, what I have experienced and what has harmed me and hurt me, whether I realize it or not, and what I have then passed on, is fragmentation, disintegration, inauthenticity, all kinds of coping and defense mechanisms because the world is not safe. And therefore, I never felt safe in my own body. There is so much fragmentation, division, incoherence in life, in our homes, in our schools, at work, and our jobs, in our churches, in our faith communities, and in the world at large, right? Instead of depth of peace and radiance of authenticity, what we often get buffeted by is the opposite of that. So speaking as someone for whom my life has been defined by my relationship with Christ, and for a long time, I've always been wondering, what does that mean? And what does union with Christ mean? There's something very compelling about even just the idea of being united with Christ. And of course, the interior integration journey is about the journey into becoming one with Christ, of becoming divinized, right? Union with Christ brings integrity and authenticity to ourselves, to our relationships, to the places that we are in, whether it's at home, at school, at work, in our churches, in our families, in all our relationships. When there is integration, there is integrity. So integrity really coming from that word integration, right? What is inside matches what is outside. And I am real, and I'm at peace with where I am, who I am, how I am, even if it's not perfect, even if I'm still figuring things out. I realize I'm a work in progress. I'm a pilgrim on a pilgrimage, and that I'm still writing my story. God is still writing my story. So the thing is, this union with Christ is a very specific and concrete thing for each and every one of us. I think one of the difficulties that I had when I was making this journey up to this point, especially early on in my journey, is that oftentimes what I hear and learn about union with Christ is very abstract, it's very conceptual, it's very universal, right? And I'm a very abstract and conceptual person, so I have no problem with grasping the concepts of what it's like, what it means to be a disciple, what it means to be in union with Christ. My difficulty was in the nitty-gritty, concrete, specific reality of my daily life. Those concepts were not incarnated, and I didn't know how to incarnate it. Have you ever felt so frustrated when you kind of like know I'm supposed to be so-called like this or like that, or I want to be more compassionate, I know I need to be more compassionate or less judgmental, but you just don't know how. You try by trying to stop yourself when you're judging people, or beating yourself up when you're judging people. You try to be more understanding with other people, but you still find you're not truly growing in compassion. You're still judging. You are judging yourself. There are these patterns of dysfunction in your life that you just bring over and over again to God to ask for help, to ask for grace. And then you wonder, why is it that things are not really improving? Or maybe even things are improving. Sometimes you have to look really, really hard to find what has maybe changed or improved a bit. But if you are honest with yourself, you may actually see that, oh my gosh, I'm really still struggling, right? And then you wonder, what are all these resources that I have picked up? Assuming you're someone like myself for whom that identity in Christ is important, right? You would have been reading, learning, attending classes, going for formation, going for retreats. How are all these things helping me to live in the day-to-day life when I'm not away, taking a break from my day-to-day life? For example, when I'm on retreat, right? So union with Christ actually has to be very specific and concrete. There's no one-size-fits-all. Every story is different. That's a refrain I keep repeating as well. Every path is unique, and every mission is unrepeatable. So really, interior integration matters for people who are seeking that depth of peace, that radiance of authenticity, and who also believe that your time on earth, that you want to spend it in a way that is not wasted, in a sense that you want to make the highest impact that your life can make for the kingdom, in the truest sense, in the world, okay? So that's another thing when I talk about integration, why there is the emphasis on integration is that it is an integration not of our faith as well as our living of it in the world. This is something that most people struggle to integrate, right? It's like our faith life and what we do for our faith is one dimension of our life, and then the rest of our time, whether it's in our families or at work, in school, etc., in the larger world, it's almost like that part of us or the world is competing with our faith for us or with God for us. So that's what happens when there's fragmentation and disintegration. When there's integration, you don't see that sharp divide between the sacred and the secular anymore. You realize that God is in all things and he encounters you in all things, and he's drawing you into becoming more and more of yourself so that you can make an impact in the world through your identity in him, through who you truly are in him. All right. So why is it that I chose to be an integration coach? One of my life verses that has defined my journey and also defined my call is Luke 4:18, or really actually it was when Jesus actually reads from the scroll of Isaiah announcing his ministry, right? And he said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, and to set the oppressed free." So it's really this setting prisoners free. For me, the experience of the interior journey, which is one of integration, has been a journey of being set free, of being captives and being set free. Set free to be who God created me to be. So true interior freedom, for me, the way I see it, the ways that it has resonated with me when other people speak of it or other people write of it, is the freedom that gives us the courage to be exactly who God created us to be, even in the face of persecution, even in the face of rejection, even in the face of, everything. Just look at Christ, right? He was exactly who he was, even unto death. He could love, even unto death, because that was who he was. He was himself, right? And that is the freedom that I've always sought and that I know a lot of people seek. And the freedom to then make the impact that God actually created each and every one of us to make uniquely in the world. So Thomas Merton, you may be familiar with him. Thomas Merton, who was a Benedictine monk. I cannot remember. This is a senior moment for me right now. The term from an abbey who is a contemplative and a writer, contemplative writer. There was this quote. There's this quote attributed to him. Hey, right? So there's a quote attributed to Thomas Merton, right? That for me to be a saint means to be myself. For me to be a saint means to be myself. What is holiness? For those of us who believe that we desire holiness, I think many of us start off by looking at models of holiness, for example, in the canonized saints, and then they're so different, right? And then we think, I could never do that. I could never be like that. And then we get so hung up over how far we are away from that, from those models of holiness that other people have shown. But I think what's beautiful about Thomas Merton's quote is the truth that no saint is meant to be repeated. And each of us have been given the same potential as all the canonized saints as well, to be exactly who God created us to be. And whether or not it is acknowledged ever officially, like for example, being canonized, it doesn't matter, right? I mean, what matters is the delight that God has, that you, his beloved, are living the life that he gave you, that he created you to live. It really doesn't matter whether it's acknowledged or not. To have that kind of depth of peace gives us that radiance of authenticity. It is a joy, truly, that no one can rob from you when we are at peace, knowing that we are the one that God loves, the one whom God delights in. Right? But the journey to becoming that is long and fraught. And I think a lot of us, we struggle with a lot of shoulds and oughts. And we don't realize that in our insecurity, we try and borrow somebody else's authority. Somebody else was maybe more learned, somebody else was more acclaimed, more recognized, or maybe on the church or any body of authority. Because we don't have that confidence in being who we are. We try to live a life that someone else tells us is a good way to live. But the interior integration journey is about moving from that, which I think we all begin with, into finding Christ living authoritatively, so Christ himself living authoritatively from within us in our own lives in a way that is unique and different and unrepeatable from anyone else. So to be true and faithful to Christ is not mutually exclusive from being faithful to my true self. I'll repeat that. To be true and faithful to Christ is not mutually exclusive from being faithful to my true self. I think a lot of us struggle because we have no sense of who we are in our true self. We're always looking outside for affirmation, for confirmation, and a lot of times those sources are themselves distorted, right? Which is why the interior integration journey is one that must be made by ourselves. No one can make it for us, right? No guide, no matter how wise, how good, can make it for us. Ultimately, even the guides and that we may turn to, the teachers, the mentors, the elders that we may turn to, they can only kind of like show us the way and maybe give us a bit of help when we run into problems that we can't quite know how to solve on our own. But we have to be the ones to make the journey, right? So it's a journey. I can't emphasize long enough or more, enough that it is a journey, and it is a long journey. God meets us where we are at, though. So we only need to be concerned at any one point about where we are. It's good sometimes to have a sense that we're moving towards something, but a lot of us get too fixated and obsessed with what the goal should look like and what the end should look like. And then we just get stuck and we don't move, and we get confused and distracted by a million things, and we completely miss how God is present to us right now, where he's actually putting his hand on in terms of in our lives. Where is it that he's calling to healing? It's not overwhelming if we can learn to be just present to the present moment, to how God is being present to us. Okay, I just said present a lot of times there, but it's true, right? It is not overwhelming. This huge and long journey is not overwhelming if we can learn to just be present to the present and to how God is present to us. So we just need to know what is that next right thing, right? As the song, is it in Frozen or Frozen 2? I actually really liked that song. It's like sometimes when you're just down in the pits and you're stuck and you don't see any way out, just focus on the next right thing that you need to do, the next right step that you need to take. The present moment, right? So one thing that I've learned, and why I believe that there is such a need for the kind of thing that I do, an interior integration coach, is precisely because it's a journey, right? It's a developmental process. And while there are a lot of very good resources out there that I have myself availed myself to, no one has ever kind of presented to me that this is a journey and these are the stages and when you're at this stage, this is what you need. And when you're at the next stage, this is what you need. And when you're in this season, this is how things are meant to be different. And it's okay, because whenever we grow into a new stage or we grow into another season, things can really change. And when there's no one to guide us, it can feel very overwhelming, right? And because there are so many dimensions and components to incarnating our faith and being able to live out our faith and be who we truly are, it's not something that any one discipline is enough to support us in. There so no, that's why there was no source for me that could tell me these are how these different disciplines come together. These are how these different resources come together. This is how you decide or discern what you need at this moment, right? So I experimented a lot myself because I was really hungry, right? And I sought and I tried, and I was someone who, almost like whatever it was, I've kind of tried before, different kind of retreats, different kind of formations, spiritual direction, different kind of spiritualities within the Catholic tradition. I didn't just try everything at one go, but as I went along, I mean, often it was God who led me to the next thing. So I really have to thank God. And maybe rephrase what I said earlier. There was no one person, human, who showed me how all these resources kind of could string together to help me. But at every step, God did. Okay, there was a lot, even leading me to the specific people that I was led to in terms of spiritual directors or the books and the resources. All were, you could say, serendipitous, but really it was the Lord who led me to the right person or the right book or the right resource at the time in my life that I needed it. But it took me a longer time when I've passed a certain phase, and then I look back and then I could connect the dots, right? Then I realized that this is how things connected. And I slowly realized that even in my casual conversations with people who are also really seeking, that these connections really helped them, right? And these kind of connections you can't really find them anywhere else. But I didn't think for a very long time that was something I could do full time, or that I would do full time, because there was no such job. There's no such industry. There's no such job, right? But the question that I've been asking all my life is, Lord, to whom are you sending me? Who am I? Right? And what's the purpose of my life? And also because there's this longing to make a difference, to be able to make an impact. And I have always also asked, well, to whom are you sending me? And at a very significant turning point in my life. And that was the turning point that brought me from being a full-time PhD student to taking a leave of absence and going into the parish to volunteer full time as a start, right? It was such a big change. At that turning point, I felt the Lord tell me. So I had been asking since I was 18 years old, Lord, what is my mission, right? And he never told me, because the response I always got from him was, and are you willing to suffer for me? I'm not kidding. Okay, that's another. I may have shared this in one of my podcast episodes. I don't remember. I'm not going to go into detail in that because that itself is a long story. But at 18, when I was making important life decisions, what am I going to study? Which university was I going to study at? And I was, it was really different, the options, between getting a government scholarship to study in Oxford, politics, philosophy, and economics, versus doing something like theology and philosophy, right? My teachers thought I was mad to want to do theology and philosophy. But so I thought that if God told me my mission, I would know what to choose. And it was one of the first times I really experienced God answering me in prayer. And the question that came back to me was, are you willing to suffer for me? And he led me to realize in that conversation, until I was ready to answer that question, I'm not ready to know my mission. So at 18, I started asking that question. And it was only when I was about 30, almost 30, that I actually could, when this question was revisited, every now and then he would ask, I realized I could say, as long as you promise that you're with me, Lord, yes. I don't know what that means. And then after that, I kind of regretted, because immediately some stuff began to happen that was difficult to go through. But I said yes. And that was when he revealed to me shortly after. He said that the mission that I'm sent to, the people that I was sent to, and he was quite specific. I mean, already quite specific. He said, I'm sending you and not to the materially poor. So he kind of told me, so stop thinking about, would my call be being a missionary to, another nation, a third world nation, or to work with those who are really materially poor. Right? So he said, I'm not sending you to the materially poor, but to the emotionally poor, who, like yourself, like me, have lost their ability to believe that they are worthy of my love. Right? And then I realized, I mean, at that time, although he said that, I still had no idea what that meant, because it's still very broad. I mean, it's a lot more specific, but it's still really, really broad, right? Like I could do that in many, many ways. So over time, as I experimented, I lived, I discerned, I realized I was also really sent to people who have spent their lives trying to prove their value to others, because that's my story too, okay? Who have spent their lives proving that they have value to others. So a lot of times these are people who have, in a sense, also made it, doing quite well, maybe, at least externally, doing quite well, but still have no idea who they are, okay? So spent their lives proving their value to other people and still no idea who they are themselves. So then the question is, okay, if these are the people that I'm meant to help, there are many ways to help. So why not as a spiritual director? Why not as a counselor or a therapist? I've actually considered all of these before. And I've also considered being a teacher, as in being a professor, right? Because I really love learning and I love communicating, as is obvious, I'm sure. I love teaching. And so I've considered all that before, right? Being a professor or being a teacher, being a spiritual director or being a counselor and therapist. There was something in each of these that spoke to me, but at the same time, they were very limiting. They were too limiting for what I felt was needed and what I felt I was called to do. Okay, so why interior integration coach? Why did I end up being this funny thing that is not a spiritual director, not a counselor or therapist, right? Not a university professor, but an interior integration and clarity coach? Because in the larger journey to becoming who we are, to really becoming who we are, not just in concept, but in reality, right? That long journey, we need, like I said, more than one kind of help and more than one kind of support and resource. And in my experience, there's actually a lot more that is required than what you can get from spiritual direction, than what you can get from counseling and therapy, right? For example, all these are necessary, okay? So these are very important. In fact, I'll say these are more foundational, okay? What we pick up from, if you have a good spiritual director, and that's something else to discuss, as in what would mean, what would a good spiritual director mean? What would a safe spiritual director mean? But a good, sound, wise spiritual director can help us deepen the way that we relate with Christ. Okay, usually it's in learning maybe new forms of prayer, discerning which forms of prayer we're being invited to at this season in our life to deepen. So a good spiritual director, a good one, will be able to recognize what season we're in and what stage of the journey we're in. And if they know they're not a good match for us, they would be able to tell us as well and maybe recommend another spiritual director for us. Okay, but a good spiritual director will help us grow our resources in our prayer life and in deepening our relationship with the Lord, with God. A good counselor or a good therapist helps us make sense and repair the fracturedness within our relationship with ourselves. Yeah, okay, so here you see the difference. They are both interconnected. They're kind of like connected and overlapped. Okay, so for example, in spiritual direction, the principles of spiritual direction in general, no matter what tradition they may come from, requires that we are able to connect with ourselves to really deepen our intimacy with the Lord, with God. But the focus of spiritual direction is not on deepening your relationship or healing a relationship with yourself per se. It's on how to grow that relationship with God, right? But some spiritual directors that are maybe they have a bit of more interdisciplinary kind of training, may be able to also bring in things like inner child healing within the context of spiritual direction. That was my experience. That was my introduction to inner child healing. It was from a spiritual director, all right? But as we realize that the foundation that we are building on also needs a better, a more healed relationship with ourselves, that's where, therapy can come into play. Counseling can come into play. Those are resources that work very complementarily, kind of thing, with what we learn in spiritual direction. Okay? So a deepening life of prayer and a more healed relationship with our inner selves, that is the foundation we must strengthen for what God wants to build in us, or for the life that God wants to build for us. Okay, for our mission. If you're someone that's interested in mission, if you've been asking, you're trying to discern vocation, not whether it's because you believe that's what you're supposed to do, or because there really is a desire in you, you wish to know, right? What is my life for? Whom am I for? Well, here's the thing. You're not going to be ready to know that or to do it until you have a more healed relationship with yourself and a more healed relationship with God. Right? But beyond that foundation, in order to move into really being able to live out our mission, clarifying our mission, knowing what it is and living it out, we need clarity to be more specific about ourselves, and direction, clarity and direction. That comes from integrating our relationship with Christ, our security, the growing security in our relationship with God and with ourselves, right? But also combining that with, learning to, attuning to God, or being attuned to with God, learning to attune to ourselves, but also knowing ourselves well, loving ourselves in a very concrete way, including what are the kind of scripts that bind us, which is very specific to us, different for everybody else, right? What are our handicaps? Where are the wounds, the kinds of wounds that we need healing in? What is the motivational design that God has given me? What gets my engine going, and what am I uniquely gifted to do? What are my gifts? What's my temperament? All these things also will tie into the way we relate to ourselves, the way we relate to God, even our spirituality can really vary. Something that really can help someone else draw closer to God may feel really wrong for us and doesn't work for us or for where we are because of the design that God has given us. And that's okay. But you see, without an understanding of what makes you different and specific, the particularity, then our relationship with God, the deepening of the intimacy, or our clarity in who we are called to serve, also will kind of plateau and will kind of get stuck after a while. Okay, this is something that I think fewer people know about or have really thought about. And even if you go and attend different workshops, like I said, different workshops to find out, like maybe, what's a personality and all that kind of thing. And there are plenty of psychometric tests. And I know that for some people, even in the course of your career, you're sent for leadership development and you go for all these things. But the question is, even if you know, so, quote unquote, like what type you are, so what? How do you use that knowledge in your relationship with yourself, in leading yourself, in becoming more yourself? And how do you know how free you are? You know what I'm saying? You can have a lot of data, but if you don't know how to make sense of the data, if there's no coherence to the data, you're still going to be stuck. Okay, so that's what I found. To have clarity and have direction, we need to know not just the right things about ourselves, how to attune to ourselves, accept ourselves as we learn more about ourselves. We also need to know how to align how we live with what we learn about ourselves. We need to know how to accept our weakness, but what are the ways that maybe then we need to lean into to mitigate for our weakness, but not rejecting it. All kinds of things. Okay, and it's in an integrated way that includes relationship with God, relationship with self, knowing who we are, and then living it out in the world. So it's praxis. So what I just said, living it out in the world is very, very key. I'm not interested in just piety for piety's sake, or just thinking that I do what my faith requires or worship requires to fulfill some kind of requirement, and then I do what I do in my own life, and the two things are very distinct. That's what I usually see happen, actually, right? That's why there's lack of coherence, there's lack of integration, there's a lack of witness. I think to really be witness to the gospel, we need more people with integration and authenticity in their lives, so that it's who you are, who you show up, how you show up at work, doing very secular things, like secular things in the sense that it's in the world. It may have nothing to do with church. You may be interacting with people that are not of your faith at all. You are revealing Christ to them while you're doing what you're doing out there in the secular world. That's integration. That's mission, right? Because if we only think that mission is what we do within the walls of our church or doing church kind of projects or all that kind of thing, how is that? How is that being a missionary disciple? So being in the world, living out who we are in the world is a big part of it, and that requires praxis. Praxis, right? It requires praxis. So it doesn't matter how much you know if you can't embody it, if you can't live it out, right? A lot of us, we suffer from this disconnect because, like I said, those of us who already take our faith seriously, we tend to want to learn a lot about it. We tend to want to read a lot about it. We can read theologians. We can, we want to learn a lot, but then we look at our lives, we look at our own relationships with our husbands, with our spouses, for example, with our kids, with our parents, at work, and we realize that we're still impotent, right? We're still so helpless and powerless. Where is the power of Christ in our lives? Apart from the times when we are feeling so inspired and enamored by the writings of the saints, for example, or whatever it is that we're reading that is inspiring us, or some very, very inspiring preaching, for example. All that's well and good. But where is that when we are at work? When, like for example, my friend Oil of Blessings who just joined, when she is educating people about about aromatherapy, about what essential oils can do that's from nature. How is that work related to who God created her to be? How is that work related to Christ making himself present through the work of her hands? That requires praxis. That requires integration. Right? That is more powerful, I will say. She can reach more people who never would have heard of Christ, and they may not even know of Christ explicitly, but how can they experience his presence in the depth of her inner peace, in the radiance of her authenticity? That's the challenge, I think, of really being truly a missionary disciple. And that can only happen when you have interior integration, right? So that's why there's praxis. It doesn't matter how much you know if you can't embody it, if you can't live it out. So I basically, in my journey that spans 30 years now, especially more intense, maybe the last 15 years or so, I'm kind of like a pioneer. That's how God created me as well, right? I realized that no one can string it together for me. So I have to figure it out on my own. What helps and what doesn't? What helps at what stage of the journey? And then I realized there's actually so much beauty and grace and wisdom in even how different things fit together, right? That how different things can be synthesized to help our journey, right? So I want to say that, let me see, just check my notes for a bit. So I think there are different resources, and I myself explored and tried to refine and get more specific as to what's my call. So I know I feel called to formation, to education of some sort, right? When I was doing my PhD, actually, it was philosophy of education. It was actually looking at the, I guess you could say, secular education, in schools. And then I realized that my heart wasn't in there. I mean, I believed in it, but that wasn't the fit. And then I realized, I think it's spiritual formation. But then that's also very broad, right? And I got formed, and I tried catechesis. Is that it? No, not it. Not it's not enough. Mentoring and forming young people, discipling them, that gave something, but that still wasn't it. And I realized that I felt very called to older people as well, not just young people. In fact, if anything, I think sometimes I feel a little bit more for those who are a little older and who are still searching and who have so much more life experience and so much pain that they've already gone through just simply because they've been alive longer, right? And they want to know how to be at peace with themselves and with God, and they don't know how to break free, so to speak, right? So over time, like I said, I realized that I practice what I teach in a sense. Okay, so how do we pick up the clues in our life, and how do they come together for the unique call that we have? And I realized that God was leading me into something that calls me to teach. Remember, university professor was one of my possibilities. To, in a sense, do part of what spiritual directors do, which is to help people discern, and to help them to ask good questions, to help them connect with what's going on in their lives, what God might be saying to them. To do part of, not the same as counseling or therapy, right? But to be very aware of that dimension and that area of the need for attunement to ourselves, to heal our relationship with ourselves, and to make people aware of that, to design programs, the exercises when I coach, to give people the opportunity to practice that. Okay, so that doesn't, I always emphasize what I do does not replace or substitute for spiritual direction or therapy. If anything, it builds on them. It builds on them. Quite a few of my clients have already been going for regular spiritual direction for years, and some of them have already, even before they come to me, already started counseling or therapy. And oftentimes, I find that these are the clients who are really do deep work with me, okay? Because they are really very committed. They're willing to invest in their own interior growth. They have been finding on their own that that's not enough, that what they have done up to this point is still not enough. So they're hungry and they're looking, and they get that the part that I can help them with is the integration and the clarifying, so that they're clearer about who they are. They can get clarity and direction, right? When you need to make concrete life decisions, such as, should I quit my job, or should I change what I'm doing? Am I doing what God is calling me to do? I'm rising through the ranks, for example, but I'm still not sure this is what I'm meant to do, for example. But in order to make concrete life decisions, we need concrete data. And that's where interior integration coaching can help with clarity and direction, right? Because specificity and particularity is very, very important. Being very concrete and very particular, what makes you different from everybody else, helps you to experience you being loved by God in a way that He doesn't love anybody else. Knowing that He loves us, that we're His beloved, knowing that everybody is God's beloved, that's one thing. But we need to know how we are specifically, particularly loved by God in order to have that embodied in us, so that we can actually live from that identity. Okay, it can't just be a conceptual, abstract thing. It has to be enfleshed. So there's a season in the journey. I mentioned it's a long journey. And early on in the season, absolutely, there are a lot of things that we can do. The intensity maybe wouldn't be there as much for us. We go where our friends go. We go for the ambiance. We go for maybe the fun, the sense of being together with others. There may be more opportunities for live mass events and mass formation, mass as in large group formation. And even when you break off into, let's say, smaller communities, at least where I am in Singapore, a lot of times the formation is done for the entire community. That's okay and good and helpful for a season. But remember, I'm always saying that there are many seasons and many stages, and there's a point when that stops being helpful. And it's very, very important for anyone, if you really want to become who you really are in God, you have to be ready for God to lead you out of pastures that had fed you in the past, but which is no longer feeding you now, and when the Good Shepherd is actually leading you somewhere else. Okay? So at some point, it's very true, you need to have more individual guidance in your journey. Okay? I have a whole podcast episode that goes into more of the difference between, for example, spiritual direction and counseling. What's the difference? How do you know which one you need? Or do you need both, right? I said a little earlier in this particular live, but I have a whole podcast episode on that. You can look it up and listen to that. Recognize that, begin to learn to recognize what season you're in or what stage of the journey you're in. Educate yourself. Invest in yourself. Invest in your interior integration journey and invest in your interior journey. That would look, in terms of specifics, different for different people, right? Depending on your age, your stage of life, depending on the resources that you have, how much money you have on hand. But no matter what the actual amount of money maybe we have, in our bank account, we always spend our money on what we value. We always spend on what we value. All right. When you value something enough, you would choose to spend it rather than on something else. So oftentimes, the resort, I don't know about for many people, it really is. Like, for example, some people are willing to spend on a gym membership, on getting a personal coach because they really value building their fitness. Or maybe they're training for a marathon or they're training for, some kind of sports kind of thing, and they will invest. Even if that individual coach or personal coach is expensive, they will invest because they need to. Somebody I know recently had to have a surgery. He had a slip disc, it was quite bad. And so after the surgery, as part of recovery, he needed not just physiotherapy, but he was told, go and pick up Pilates, right? It will help you in your healing journey. It will help strengthen the muscles supporting your spine. And so he did. And, because of his surgery and, the specific needs, he invested in a one-on-one Pilates coach that cost $200 an hour, right? And he says it probably won't be indefinite, but during this period of time, these few months that after when he's recovering after surgery, this is of high importance to him. Why? He actually works in I think in investment and all that kind of thing, right? And he needs to sit long hours in meetings, in talking to clients. And because of his injury, he can't actually sit too long. He's supposed to move around work and walk around more. And the faster or the sooner he can strengthen his core strength and recover, the earlier he can really go back to work at the pace that he needs to be at. And so because of that, in this season of his life, he's willing to invest in a Pilates coach, like individual Pilates coach, right? So we invest in what we value. And for all of us, I think at some point we have to ask ourselves, how willing are we to invest in our spiritual journey or in our interior journey, right? That could be in the form of books. It could be in the form of courses. I know people who sign up to study entire masters, like let's say in theology or even going for formation in spiritual direction as part of their own formation, right? And these cost thousands of dollars, even tens of thousands of dollars, It's because they value their formation, right? So, but what we often miss out though in this larger picture, like I said, what we want is the praxis. We also need to be smart and wise about what we're investing in, whether it really helps us, right? So that's a journey of, in our own lives, becoming better governors and leaders of ourselves, to guide ourselves in our particularity into being the person that God really created us to be, right? So if you want to live the life God created you to live, you need to be more free. So what will help you become more free? That's one way of looking and assessing, the resources that maybe you're looking at investing in. You need to be more free to be so, right? You need to make the journey, which is a long journey, but what does it mean to begin where you are right now? What is the next right step? That's all we always need to ask. What is the next right step? So I have another friend that was a childhood friend of mine, and we reconnected maybe about 7, 8 years ago. And she has a PhD, okay, and she's not working. Because as she told me, after all such a long and expensive education, she realized that really it really didn't feel like that was what God was calling her to be. Right? And to the consternation of her parents and a lot of people who don't understand why she has a doctor in front of her name, and and she can get a good job in a university and all that, and she's not doing that. And you know what she's been doing for the last few years? Investing in spiritual direction, in therapy, because she's realizing that as active as she is, and she's super active also, like in the community and in the church and all that, and she has kids, she has 4 kids. So even just being a mother also could be a full-time job kind of a thing, right? Through all of that, she didn't know who she was. And even now, she still doesn't know who she is. She's still just reconnecting with her inner child over time, right? Because she's beginning to recognize just how much complex trauma she's gone through since her childhood. And that story is not unique to her. In a different way, that is my story. I just didn't complete my PhD. And sometimes I'm really grateful I didn't, because I think it would be even harder if I had completed my PhD and I had a doctor in front of my name. I kind of probably feel more obligated to, work a few years or something using my doctorate, right? But I already knew in my heart that that isn't me. that path isn't mine. So what is your path? And do you want to know what your path is and to be free, informed, and equipped to live it? You need to start actively discerning who to journey with you. Even in terms of your friends and companions, we need to discern that, because we're often going to be held back by the environment that we're in, right? And many of us who begin to make this journey into deeper integration will find that we're the only one within our immediate circle. Even if we have some friends we can share with, we can trust, and we can kind of talk to, usually they are not yet where we are on this journey. So they can listen to you, and you can confide in them, but you are gonna still feel like I'm alone, right? So one thing I found helpful to really pray for and invest in is the sense of connection with people who are on the same journey or who are further along the journey. A lot of times these are not people that I know personally. A lot of times these are people, maybe let's say through books, or retreat masters, or some other people. But through the talks that they give, through the books that they write, I know they are making the same journey. In fact, that maybe they're ahead of me in the journey, and I would invest in buying their workshops. I would invest in going for retreats done by them. Specific people, not just in general, because when you get more specific, you get clearer on what is it that you need. You know how to, in a sense, invest more wisely in your own interior journey. Okay, it won't just be so haphazard. But we begin by trying everything, and then as we grow, we get more specific. So I want to kind of before I close, share this defining experience that I had about, I think this was 2011. So this was maybe 12 years ago, I can't remember. So when I was growing up, and even up to now, it is very, very rare for me to recognize and meet somebody, a layperson, okay, I'll say specific, a layperson, who is at the top of their job, okay, in the sense that they are very competent at what they do. They are gifted and passionate with what they do, and it is very integrated with their faith. They're also a person of deep faith, and who can creatively merge what it is that they're doing in the world with their identity in Christ, and to really see that. So it's few and far between. I've met a couple. I've really had the benefit, the privilege of meeting a couple of people in my life, and one of them is Catholic. The other person that I'm thinking of is not. She's Christian. Okay, so but 12 years ago, there was a talk that I attended where Dr. Eugene Gan, he is a professor at the Franciscan University of Steubenville, and he teaches kind of like communication arts, okay? So he does like digital stuff, design. He teaches students how to design computer games, how to create computer games, design computer games, and do all kinds of digital stuff. So you need to be high tech, okay? You need tech and all that. And what struck me was when it was in an auditorium, and he went up on the stage, and he began with prayer. But it was the way he began the prayer. It wasn't like a very official prayer. It was so organic and natural. He brought, I felt, all of us who were in that auditorium into that space with him and God, where they were clearly deep friends. There wasn't a sense of very formality, fancy words or anything. It was just direct, intimate, and very simple. And I was already struck by that at that point in time, because he's a layperson, right? And I have hardly seen someone just do that without any ceremony. And then he began to share and he began to talk. He had written a book. I think there's just one book he published. It's called Infinite Bandwidth. I think it came out in 2010. So if you're interested, you can look at it. Infinite Bandwidth is talking about how to produce and consume media in a way that's discerning and faithful to he's a Catholic. He's a Catholic professor, so to the teaching of the Catholic Church specifically, right? So he shared how, as in his previous job, before he was teaching at this university, right? So he was really a professional and really good at, he's won awards and all kind of thing in doing digital art and everything. He began to wrestle in his own life. How do I integrate and be faithful using all the gifts that God has given me, doing this work that I love to do, but in a way that is authentic and also faithful to Christ and my true self. Because in his industry, sometimes he says, that clients can ask for all kinds of things. And what if what the clients ask him to create and design goes against his own conviction, his belief, which is also often to do with his faith, right? How does he navigate that? And how does he know how to make a decision? Make a discernment. So he went hunting for documents, like, are there any church documents that kind of like I can refer to? And he realized there are plenty of like little bits here and there, but there was nothing really. There was no body of work that someone like him could refer to. And you know what? So what did he decide to do? He decided to write one. I was really so impressed then, because he went to do the research. Nobody asked him to do it. He started by doing it for himself. He went to peruse and read like whatever documents he could find from the church and from scripture and all that, and in his own discernment, his own journey. After that, he wrote this book called Infinite Bandwidth. And he is saying, we shouldn't be running away from media. We shouldn't be saying that, we shouldn't watch movies, we shouldn't, all that kind of thing because they will tempt us. He's saying, no, we should be bold in entering the world and in consuming even the media, but with discernment as to what can we learn from this? What can we draw from this? Or maybe if there are really some things that we should avoid, or we should not let our children or young people, before they're ready. There's so many things, practical, specific things to discern about how to consume media and how to create media. Because even though this was like 2012, I think, 2011, I think maybe, it was already like, this is like more than a decade ago. There was social media. I think Facebook was around already. And he was saying now anyone can create media as well, right? I mean, right now, me doing this live, I am creating content for people to consume, for you to consume. So he said, we also have to start asking, how can we create content, not just consume content, with discernment in a way that has integrity and authenticity to our true selves, but also to our identity as Catholic Christians, right? So I was just so awed by his conviction. If you had been there and you heard him, his conviction that he says we need to be not just as good, but even better than all the so-called competitors, out there who are creating video games, because his work is kind of like, media, right? Creating video games and all that. He said we need to be as good or even better than them. If we are to be missionaries, if we are to make a difference and to evangelize, he says we can't offer something that's substandard and mediocre. How are you gonna draw the attention and the eyeballs and draw the kind of like the energy and attention of, let's say, the young people in his context, right? Like in computer games. If your computer game sucks or is not as polished as your competitors who may be inciting young people towards violence and all that, you have to be better than them, right? And so he was sharing how sometimes in his frustration that the university doesn't want to give his department the budget for the equipment, for the computers, because he says how can we compete if we don't have the equipment, right, for my students to learn, so that when they go out and they get jobs, they can be that excellent and compete with others. So that's Dr. Eugene Kahn's philosophy, I realize, is also very similar to my own philosophy, wherever we are at, depending on our specific call, right? Why can't we, or why are we not seeking to be the best that we can be, fearlessly learning from the world, drawing the instruments from the secular world, not thinking that the secular world is the enemy, but this is where we are called to go, to be ourselves, so that Christ can bring through us his healing, his truth, his beauty, his creativity. Because through governance, through management, through culture, media, and all these things, we can bring healing, right? When there's a good leader in an organization, even in a secular organization, what happens? People can flourish. People feel cared for, right? They can experience the presence of the Good Shepherd when there's wise leadership. When there's poor leadership, nobody flourishes. So that's just one example, right? Leadership is another area that I really have my heart on, why I feel particularly passionate about journeying and coaching leaders who also are Christian/Catholic, who want to see how is it that their relationship with Christ can make a difference in the secular organizations that they are in. Because usually you don't really get that kind of integration. right? Even if you go find faith formation material, you rarely find that kind of level of integration that goes down to the level of helping you knowing what to refer to, what data to refer to in your own discernment, and to practice in the space that you are, how to carry that out. That's so important. Okay, so Dr. Eugene Gunn's example, I mean, I just wanted to share that story because I've always been so struck by him. Till this day, in terms of, there hasn't been another person that to me embodies and represents to me that level of passion, conviction, level of spiritual maturity. I mean, I don't know him personally, so I don't know about his affective maturity and all that. But that the fact that he brings these things together, he tries to integrate his faith into his work and to witness that. Can you imagine if you and I, if we become integrated, I don't know, let's say spouses, integrated parents, okay, interiorly integrated parents, spouses, employees or employers, leaders or team members, whatever industry or career you're in, where we are bringing God's healing, His creativity, His leadership into the world, where people who may never hear who He is, no interest in stepping into our churches or don't want to hear, more about Christianity per se, can experience the incarnation of Christ through our lives, through our depth of peace and our radiance of authenticity. Can you imagine that? Well, that's the world that I imagine and that I think I long for. I've always longed for as a kid, as a young person, and I never got, right? Always like the opposite, like I said, fragmentation, hypocrisy, disintegration, hearing one thing from the pulpit or one thing from the teacher and parents, and then seeing an entirely different reality and experiencing an entirely different reality. That breaks people. And that's why, for me, this journey into freedom and authenticity also is a journey into truth, into daring to speak the truth with love, but to be unafraid of what it means. And the most important truth we need to see is the truth in our own lives. Right? The truth in our own lives that we are often so afraid of seeing. So I think that's what I wanted to share in today's kind of like the last sharing of my 30-day challenge as to why interior integration is important, and also why it is that this is what I do, the interior integration coach and clarity coach, because I see that there are gaps lacking in the resources to kind of tie things together for those people who are already at that point in your journey. So like I said, it comes at different seasons, right? But there are people who are at that point in the journey who have already been seeking, have been looking for the resources that are out there, have been trying and been committed, and you're finding that you're not able to tie things together yet, right? You've done well, whether maybe both in church circles as well as maybe in your work, but you still don't know who you are. That requires something else other than just spiritual direction and therapy and counselling. And that's a space I want to explore with partners, collaborators, colleagues in different spheres, and with the clients that I journey with. It's such a pleasure. I learn so much from coaching them and from journeying with them and from how they live their life and the other resources that they seek out. So are there any comments or any questions regarding why interior integration, or why I'm in and why I am doing what I do as an interior integration coach? Because I know it's new. And so I do often kind of get asked, like, so what is it that you're doing? And how is it different from life coaching? Okay, maybe I invite any questions. I will clarify. One thing I haven't said, I've explained how interior integration coaching is different from spiritual direction, from counseling / therapy. I will say how it's different from life coaching. Life coaching, again, is kind of like a very... Oh, hi, I'm getting a request. Is this an accidental request to join my live? Can you put it in the comments, please? Are you asking to come on to the live video? I don't quite know how to pronounce your name, Yavani. Yes? You want to come on? Can you comment, please? Can you just confirm? Because in case you press it accidentally, I don't want to bring you onto the screen. Giovanni or Giovanni, are you there? No, there's someone. Okay, there's a Giovanni. Okay, it's probably an accident. All right, I'm not gonna. if it's not an accident, okay. If you really want to come on the live to ask a question, you're welcome. Anyone's actually welcome. Okay, I just haven't tried that function yet. Because most people are already shy asking questions. I didn't expect anyone to kind of ask to come on the live. Okay, so anyway, go back to what is different from what I do compared to life coaching. Life coaches are often, kind of like how to for you to operate as your best self kind of a thing, right? And depending, I guess they can also have different kind of niches. It's still often though based on what you want to work on. Okay, so kind of like you have a particular area that you want to develop, a particular area that you want to grow in, for example, and you need someone to help break down the journey for you, a specific journey to, for example, maybe have be less people pleasing, for example. Sometimes that's something that life coaches can help people with, right? And then they help you with that particular area of becoming less people pleasing, for example. Interior integration coaching, or what I do, is different because it's not based on what you want to develop. It's kind of like helping you to get in touch with the foundation, the identity of who you are. Okay, and then what that would mean. It may mean including things like I'm a people pleaser. How can I be less people pleasing? But we don't tackle that as we don't tackle the symptom. Okay, so for example, people pleasing is a symptom, and there are ways that there are things you can practice to stop people pleasing, for example. But the way I see it, if you are a people pleaser, like I was very much so, there's a deeper root to that. Okay, that's why I talk about scripts. I talk about a wounded core, a wounded inner core, which is also connected to our relationship with ourselves and our relationship with God. So the area that we work on, or the center of gravity that we kind of focus on, is a lot deeper, not just at the symptom level. I'm not so interested in helping people with specific issues. Not that that's not important. That's what life coaches are for also, right? But what I want to really get at and help people are people who want to go deeper, and kind of tackle things at the root and become more integrated. When you work on the core, in a sense, over time, the different symptoms, including symptoms like people pleasing, on their own, they change, and there's a lot of grace involved, which is also why it's not that I just want to work with Christians or Catholics. No, I would love, sometimes people have told me, like, my work can really bless people who are also not Christians and Catholics. I agree. It's just that my experience and my approach is so intertwined and basically based on my identity and my relationship with the Trinitarian God. I don't know how to, I don't know how to untangle that from the other things that I teach. It just wouldn't have the same power. It just wouldn't have the same depth, right? So it's not it's not because I don't want to coach people who are not Christian or Catholic. I haven't actually had anyone really ask, because I guess most of you who consume my content also share this relationship with Christ. But the focus of what we do in, let's say, my work and in my, in my lives, in my content, is not about teaching you more about your faith, which is why I'm also a lot more ecumenical in this approach, okay? It doesn't really touch on doctrine and all that kind of thing. But there is a presupposed relationship with Christ that you have, that you are grounding yourself on, and as you want to develop and integrate, what does it mean to be myself in the world as a person that God created me to be, as a disciple of Christ. So that's kind of like the presupposition. And we keep coming back to that as one of the attunements that you have to, but the focus of the work and of the coaching is not on your faith or religion, okay? It's kind of like the presupposition. The focus of the coaching is a lot more, like, I draw on psychology and other instruments like motivation code and Myers-Briggs and other things, but I use them in a way that goes beyond how those instruments were created, through the lens of integration, right? And the idea is so that you can continue to, with that deeper knowledge of who you are, you can really maximize that knowledge in your self-leadership and make good discernments about your future based on concrete data, right? Not just through general spiritual direction. Even spiritual directors will often tell you you need to have more data to make your discernment. So where do you get the data? So that's an example of why I do what I do. I want to help people get concrete data, okay? But the depth and the level at which I work at presupposes there's a level of commitment, okay? Because this kind of transformation is not something that a weekend can do, a week can do, which is why the signature thing that I do, which is the actual coaching, for me is about 8 months. It's kind of like 8 months long. But I also want to do it at a way that's not too intense, so it's not like weekly sessions and all that. All that is thought out, okay? There has to be spaciousness. There has to be time for people to integrate and process and ponder. What I'm going to be introducing next year that's different from how I've been doing it so far. My offers have all been kind of like individual coaching, and I realized there's actually a lot of similarity for the clients who work with me. Not all of them, but I'm also getting clearer as to which is the group that maybe can benefit the most from what I offer, like what season or stage of the journey, or what season will be helpful. And something that I find that they can really benefit from is also being held in community, in the sense that we're all doing this individual work, but we are not alone, okay? And we can share. So that's something that I'm going to be doing for next year's cohort, for clarity. And I only take one batch a year because this work, like I said, there needs to be presence, there needs to be attunement. And I don't, it's not a large group, it's a small group. It's the nature of things. It's a journey, and it's a curated journey. It's a guided journey. It's kind of like being on a pilgrimage together, but the focus is like, in working at depth with ourselves, and then also making friends who know what it's like to be doing this kind of work, right? Because in our own individual lives, usually the people around us are not doing the same kind of work yet. So you need, in a sense, a curated group for this journey where, in a sense, I have to play that role of helping people come at the right time so that they're joining a small cohort of people who are all asking similar kind of questions and all open to learning, at this depth about themselves on how to integrate. Okay, so I hope that kind of explains also the difference between interior integration coaching and life coaching. It's just for those of you who have been asking, what's it that you do? How is it different from spiritual direction, counseling? And now I've also explained how it's different from life coaching. Okay. So any questions? No? Thank you thank you to you guys who are here, who are currently here, still watching. All right. Okay, so if there are no questions, I guess I'll wrap up. Today is day 30, the last day of my 30-day IG challenge. But the conversation doesn't end here. I think doing this 30-day life challenge has really opened up something for me. A lot of things, actually. It has been life-changing for me. I did take it up for myself to grow in my own capacity to share, to speak, to articulate, and to get clearer on what is it that I'm doing. Oh, thank you, Erica. Thank you for the congratulations. But so I'm quite sure now that I will continue with more lives in future, just not on a daily basis. It's really intense. And this will help me to streamline my content creation as well. Okay, so slowly I will be rolling out. I'm so glad that it's a very encouraging life for you today, Oil of Blessings. Yeah, so I'll be rolling out the videos from these 30 days onto YouTube, and it will also make its way to my podcast. Okay, so but the podcast will be slower because podcast hosting costs money, and the more like you put, the more hours of like content you want to host per month, the more expensive it gets. So that has to happen at a slower frequency. But I will be increasing my podcast like new episode drop. When we restarts in August, it will now be twice a week instead of once every 2 weeks because I have the content. Because now I have 30 days, I have 30 episodes worth of content that I can actually play with, okay? And I intend to continue doing live. So please continue to send me, your practical questions about interior integration. Think of it as free coaching, really, because when I do this, it's not the same as, I guess, really in-depth within my coaching container, but I can speak to a lot of issues, especially for things that you need to be aware of and deal with. I can connect with resources and all that. Okay, so thank you guys for watching. Don't be a stranger, and take care. All right, and I'm gonna take a break maybe for, I don't know how long, but maybe a few days or something like that from doing this so that I can catch up on other work. Bye guys, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you for your support and your encouragement. Take care. Bye.